Why is she here, Lindora? James Blackwood's voice cracked like the sound of distant thunder, a rare sign of unease from the usually composed head of security. His gaze shifted from the holographic screen to the woman standing before him, her sharp, intelligent eyes as cold as the space around them. She doesn't belong in Nexus Prime. Not here, not now. Lindora Starweaver's lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it, only the glint of calculation. The girl doesn't know it yet, James, but she belongs everywhere. James raised an eyebrow, his mind whirling. He wasn't sure he wanted to know where this conversation was going, but the tone in Lindora's voice told him it was too late to back out now. He leaned forward, his fingers drumming impatiently on the table. What do you mean? You're not going to like it, Lindora said, her voice low. You've known Araria Moonweaver for a day, maybe two, but I've known her since the moment she was born. And what the DNA scan didn't tell you. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. Is that she's your daughter? James blinked, stunned. His chest tightened, a cold, unfamiliar knot forming deep within him. What? Your daughter? Araria. Princess Araria Moonweaver. Daughter of the Lerian royal bloodline. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, and James Blackwood felt like he'd just stepped into a nightmare. The name Araria Moonweaver had been nothing more than a strange, out-of-place face in the security system's records. A girl with no past, no history, and an unsettling aura about her. She didn't belong in a place like this. Not on Nexus Prime, and certainly not in his life. But now, Lindora's words hit like a bombshell. Impossible, James muttered under his breath. His mind raced. He was a man who prided himself on keeping control of every situation. A seasoned head of security, trained to notice everything, miss nothing. Yet this was a curveball even he couldn't have predicted. Lindora stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the cold metallic floor. I know this is a lot to take in, but it's true. The DNA doesn't lie, James. You've been keeping your own secrets for a long time, but Araria's secret? It's bigger than anything you've ever faced. Before James could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room, signaling an alert. James shot a glance at the screen. His jaw tightened as the display flickered to life, showing the image of the Lerian woman again. Araria. Only now, she wasn't just a face on the screen. She was being watched. She's in danger, isn't she? James asked, his voice suddenly low and dangerous. His hand hovered over the emergency button on the console. Lindora nodded, her face darkening. Yes, and I think it's time you learned exactly why. The silence stretched between them like the void of space. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the realization began to settle. This wasn't just some mysterious alien stranger. This was his flesh and blood, and it was no coincidence she had appeared on his station. Who's after her? James asked, his voice steady now, though the storm brewing inside him was undeniable. Shadow operatives. People who will stop at nothing to claim her. To use her. James's hand clenched into a fist. I'll protect her, whatever it takes. Be careful what you wish for, James, Lindora said, her tone like a warning. You'll need more than just weapons to protect her. You'll need to dig deep into your own past. Into a past you've tried to forget. As James moved to leave, a low hum filled the air, and the lights flickered. Another alert popped up on the screen. The cloaking technology had been activated. The operatives were already inside. James Blackwood's breath caught as the alert pinged again, louder this time, the sound almost deafening in the silence of the room. His heart beat faster, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. His instincts, honed through years of securing high-profile assets, were screaming at him. Something's wrong. Something's happening right now. Lindora didn't waste time. They're cloaked. We won't see them coming, but they'll be in your head in a second. She moved toward the door, the sharp click of her boots echoing in the cold, sterile hallway. Her calm exterior seemed unnerving in contrast to the storm she knew was brewing outside. Stay sharp, James. They won't just be after her. They'll be after you, too. Without waiting for a response, she was gone. James stared at the empty doorway for a moment, unsure whether to follow her or lock down the security systems first. But then the decision was taken out of his hands. A soft hiss filled the room, followed by a strange, shimmering effect along the walls. The cloaking field had activated. He wasn't alone anymore. He was already moving, instinct kicking in as his hand went to the sidearm at his hip. Damn it, he thought, his mind racing. I should have known better than to trust anyone here. I've seen this before, but I never thought I'd be the one to face it. He slid into the hallway, silently, his boots barely making a sound on the floor. Every sense was on high alert. His eyes scanned the area, but the darkness around him seemed to stretch, ripple almost, as though the very space itself was bending and warping, concealing any potential threats. Araria Moonweaver. The name still rang in his ears, almost too strange to be real. And yet, here she was, an alien girl with no history, a face that had haunted him for less than 48 hours, yet had already upended everything he thought he knew about his life. And now, she was more than a stranger. She was his daughter. A princess. He had to admit, the whole thing felt like a bad dream. Araria, a princess? The idea of royalty seemed so distant, so out of place for the woman he had met. But Lindora's revelation burned in his mind, her words echoing louder than the alarms. Princess Araria Moonweaver, the daughter of the Lerian royal family. He barely had time to process the implications before a strange movement caught his eye. It wasn't just the shadows. It was something else. A figure, flickering in and out of existence, distorted by the cloaking technology. A moment later, a sharp, metallic voice crackled in his earpiece. "You've made a grave mistake, Blackwood." James's heart skipped. His grip tightened around his weapon. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice rough, betraying none of the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "I am the one who will end your career," the voice said, distorted, robotic. "And when the princess falls, you will fall with her. You will have no one to protect, no one to save." James's jaw clenched. He didn't have time to debate this, didn't have time to figure out who the hell these people were. His daughter was in danger, and every second counted. "Where is she?" The voice on the other end laughed, low and menacing. "She's closer than you think." Before he could react, a sudden movement, too fast, too precise, came from the corner of the hallway. It was a blur of shadows and cloaked figures, and then the sharp clang of something metallic hitting the floor. James swung around, his gun raised, but there was no one there. His mind raced, heart thudding in his chest. They're everywhere. They're using the cloaking tech. How can I fight this? The silence that followed felt like an eternity. But then, through the eerie quiet, a whisper broke the tension. A soft, almost gentle voice, like a breeze brushing past his ear. "You won't find her in time." It wasn't just the voice that unsettled him. It was the way it felt, as though it was all around him, inside his very mind, shifting through his thoughts, his memories. He spun, but the hallway was empty. The presence was gone. His head was spinning. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. He needed answers. And fast. Without thinking, he sprinted towards the direction he assumed Lindora had gone. She would know what to do. She had to. But the deeper he went, the more the hallways seemed to distort, like a labyrinth closing in on him. Something wasn't right. He had to get to Araria, his daughter, before it was too late. He rounded another corner, and that's when he saw her. She was standing there, as if she had been waiting for him, her back to him. Araria. But something wasn't right. She wasn't the same girl he had spoken to earlier. There was something in the way she stood, something distant in her posture, like she had become something more, or perhaps something else. "Araria?" James called, his voice shaking as he approached. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. And that was when he saw it. The glowing tattoos, the strange patterns on her skin that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a confused girl anymore. She was something ancient, something otherworldly. "I know who I am," she said quietly, her voice trembling just slightly. "And I know who you are, Father." It was like a punch to the gut. He hadn't expected her to know, hadn't prepared for this moment. She wasn't just a girl caught in the middle of some bizarre conspiracy. She was a princess, and more than that, She was his daughter. A truth he couldn't ignore any longer. You. He struggled for the right words. Araria, you're in danger. We need to leave now. Araria's gaze softened, but the intensity remained. I'm not the one in danger, father, she said, taking a step closer. They are. The air in the hallway seemed to shift as the cloaking technology flickered, revealing shadowed figures once more, their forms indistinct yet menacing. Get down, James barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a side corridor. The figures closed in on them, but this time, he wasn't alone. Lindora appeared, moving with the precision of a predator, her eyes scanning the surroundings with lethal focus. They know, Lindora said simply. They've been watching her for months. This is bigger than we thought, James. Much bigger. James felt his pulse race. He was knee-deep in something far more dangerous than he'd ever signed up for. Something much darker. And now, it was personal. His daughter wasn't just a bystander in all this. She was at the heart of a storm. The only question now was, would he be able to protect her? Would he be able to stop the coming chaos before it consumed everything he cared about? But something deep inside him told him he was about to uncover a secret even darker than the shadows closing in around them. And it would change everything. The corridors of Nexus Prime had always felt sterile to James, cold, metallic, and ever watchful. But now, they felt like a maze, a suffocating, ever-shifting labyrinth where danger lurked at every turn. The flashing lights from the emergency alarms were disorienting, but they didn't stop the feeling creeping up James's spine. The clock was ticking, and with it, his chances of protecting Araria were growing slimmer. Lindora's steps were methodical, each one purposeful as she led the way. James held Araria close, his hands steady on her arm as they navigated the unfamiliar path. Stay close, he whispered to her, his voice urgent, but she didn't seem scared. Instead, her expression was unreadable, her eyes locked in an intensity that was hard to look away from. You don't have to protect me, father, Araria said, her voice soft, but there was something unshakable in her words. She wasn't afraid. If anything, it was as if she had already accepted her fate. I'll protect you no matter what, James insisted, but his voice betrayed the uncertainty gnawing at him. He had faced threats before, pirates, assassins, even rogue commanders. But this was something entirely different. The way Araria had spoken, the way she carried herself now, it was like she knew something he didn't, and that frightened him more than any shadow operative could. Lindora turned a corner abruptly, motioning for them to follow. We need to get to the central command. I can access the systems there and lock down the station. As they moved, the sound of footsteps behind them seemed to echo, muffled at first, but then sharper. Closer. James's grip on his weapon tightened as they neared the next turn. They're right behind us, he muttered, turning to Lindora. She nodded, her expression unreadable. They know we're here. But we can't stop now. Suddenly, a figure materialized in front of them, its form flickering like a mirage. A cloaked operative, his face hidden behind a mask, stepped into the hallway, blocking their path. His eyes glowed beneath the mask, faint but unmistakable. I warned you. The voice came, raspy and mechanical. You should have stayed out of this, Blackwood. James didn't hesitate. He raised his sidearm in one smooth motion, aiming directly at the figure, but before he could fire, another figure appeared from behind them, then another, and another. The cloaking field was too advanced. They were surrounded. We've been watching you, the first operative continued, his voice colder now, more threatening. And we've been waiting. The princess is the key to everything. The key to a future you're too blind to see. James's eyes darted around, trying to figure out his next move. His pulse was racing, but his mind was working on overdrive. This was more than just a fight. It was about survival. His daughter's survival. Araria stepped forward, her expression calm, unfazed. You think you can stop me? Her voice rang out clear and defiant, something no human could have pulled off with such authority. The tattoos on her skin glowed brighter, swirling patterns that shifted like living energy. The operatives paused. James could see it now. There was something powerful about Araria. something that went beyond just being the daughter of a long-lost king. One of the operatives, who had been watching her closely, shifted slightly. "She doesn't even know what she's capable of," he muttered, as though to himself. But then, he looked at James, his eyes narrowing with cold malice. "It's too late, Blackwood. We've already won." With a sudden flick of his wrist, the operative activated a device, and the air around them seemed to distort, swirling with a powerful energy field. James barely had time to react before a blast of energy shot toward them, slamming into the walls and sending debris scattering in every direction. But just as quickly, Araria raised her hand, and the energy around her seemed to bend, redirecting the blast harmlessly into the floor. "Enough." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it felt like a command, an undeniable force. The operatives froze, unable to move, their cloaks flickering erratically as the energy around them struggled to stabilize. For a moment, everything was still. "Who are you?" James asked, his voice strained, his confusion more pronounced than ever. This wasn't just the princess he thought he was protecting. This was someone, or something more. "I am Araria Moonweaver," she said, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light. "But I am also the daughter of the lost king, the one who was exiled for a crime he never committed. And I am the heir to a kingdom you've never heard of." James stood in stunned silence, his mind racing to catch up with the gravity of her words. The truth was unraveling before him, piece by piece. He had known something was off about Araria, but this was more than just an alien girl. This was a royal, an heir, the key to something far greater than he had ever imagined. The operatives were no longer frozen. They moved toward Araria in unison, their weapons raised, their mission clear. But before they could take another step, Lindora moved quickly, her own weapon activated with a soft hum. She fired once, and the first operative crumpled to the ground, his cloaking field deactivated, revealing a form that was human, yet eerily alien in some way. "We don't have time for this," Lindora muttered, urgency in her tone. "Araria, we need to move. Now." The remaining operatives hesitated for a moment, clearly trying to assess the situation. But Araria, still standing tall, raised her hand once more. The air around her shimmered, and suddenly, the entire group of shadow agents was pulled into a vortex of energy, their bodies suspended mid-air. The leader of the operatives screamed in frustration, but Araria's control over the energy field was absolute. With a flick of her wrist, the operatives were thrown violently against the walls, incapacitated. "We're not done yet," Araria said, turning to James. "They won't be the last of them." Before James could respond, the alarms in the station grew louder, signaling a new threat. "An even greater one." "We've only just begun," Araria added, her voice filled with an odd mix of sorrow and determination. "The truth about my bloodline, my kingdom, it's much darker than you can imagine. And it's time for you to face it." The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the space station seemed to come alive with an ominous hum. James's thoughts raced as the walls of Nexus Prime shuddered under the weight of a greater force closing in. "This isn't just about survival anymore," Lindora said, her tone shifting to one of cold certainty. "This is about war, and we're standing at the center of it." James had no idea what was coming next. The revelations were more than he could process in one breath, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave his daughter's side. Not now, not ever. Together, they would face whatever darkness was on the horizon. And whatever it was coming for them all. The tremors in the station intensified, as though the entire structure was being pulled apart from the inside out. James could feel the vibration under his boots, the energy shifting, warping, ready to break free at any moment. The operatives that Araria had incapacitated lay unmoving, their cloaking tech malfunctioning as they slumped to the ground. But the threat hadn't passed. It had only just begun. "Where are we going?" James asked, his voice low, urgent. He kept a close eye on Araria, who was standing tall, her eyes distant, lost in thought as though she were listening to something beyond the chaos. "We need to get to the vault," Araria said, her voice steady despite the storm around them. "It's the only place that will hold the truth about my heritage. The key to everything. The vault." Lindora asked, her eyes narrowing. But that place has been sealed for centuries. No one has access to it. Araria's gaze turned toward Lindora, a flicker of determination in her eyes. No one but me. I am the last of the royal bloodline. The vault holds the answers, and it holds the power to stop this. James exchanged a glance with Lindora. There was a flicker of doubt in his mind. The vault, ancient, hidden, shrouded in mystery. Was it truly the key to saving Nexus Prime? Or was it another dangerous relic of a forgotten war? We don't have much time, Lindora said, cutting through his thoughts. If the station's systems are compromised, the vault will be the first target. Let's move. They took off down the corridor, the hum of the alarms growing louder as they approached the heart of Nexus Prime. The central core, the most secure part of the station, was where the vault was hidden. It was said to contain not only the records of the Lerian royal family, but also unimaginable power. Something the shadow operatives were clearly desperate to get their hands on. The closer they got, the more intense the atmosphere became. The walls around them flickered with energy, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the station, like a beast waiting to be unleashed. James could feel it, the weight of something ancient, something dark, pressing in on them. Araria was leading the charge, her every step purposeful, as if the path had already been set for her long ago. James, still reeling from the revelation that she was his daughter, struggled to keep up. She was no longer just a frightened girl caught in the middle of a conspiracy. She was a princess, a force in her own right, and the stakes were higher than ever before. They reached the central command, and Lindora immediately began overriding the security systems. "We're running out of time," she muttered, her fingers dancing across the control panel, trying to bypass layers of encryption. Araria stepped forward, placing her hand on a terminal embedded in the wall. The moment her skin made contact, the room lit up with an otherworldly glow. The vault was responding to her presence. "It's opening," she said, her voice almost reverent. "This is where it all began." James's pulse quickened as the massive doors of the vault began to slide open. Inside, beyond the reinforced walls, lay the heart of the Lerian legacy. He couldn't see much in the dim light, but he could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about Araria anymore. This was about everything. Then, a sudden realization hit him like a wave. "They know we're here," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. "The operatives. They'll be here any second." Araria's gaze hardened. "I'm not afraid." "You should be," James snapped, his eyes darting to the security feed. "They're already here." From the darkness beyond the vault, the shadow operatives emerged, their forms shifting and flickering like ghosts. They moved with unnatural speed, their cloaking tech still active, but their presence unmistakable. They were closing in, and fast. "Get to the vault," Lindora shouted, grabbing Araria's arm and pulling her inside. James followed closely, his weapon raised as he scanned the area. "We're not out of this yet," he muttered. "They'll stop at nothing to take you down." The vault's doors slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, sealing them inside. For a moment, there was silence, except for the distant hum of the station's failing systems. The flickering lights cast long, eerie shadows across the room, revealing ancient symbols etched into the walls. "This is it," Araria said, her voice filled with a strange mix of awe and sorrow. "The truth about my family. And the reason they're after me." With a touch of her hand, the holographic interfaces in the vault activated, projecting images of an ancient civilization. Leria, her homeworld, a planet lost to time. It was a place of unmatched beauty and power, but also a place of terrible betrayal. "There was a war," Araria said softly, her eyes never leaving the images before her. "A war between the royal family and the hidden factions. My father was betrayed, exiled, and in his absence, those who took his throne uncovered a weapon of unimaginable power. A weapon that could destroy not just Leria, but entire galaxies." James stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "What kind of weapon?" Araria looked at him, her expression grave. "The power to manipulate space itself, to fold time, and to control life and death. The very essence of existence." James's breath caught in his throat. He had known the stakes were high, but this This was beyond anything he could have imagined. They weren't just fighting for the survival of Nexus Prime. They were fighting to stop a force that could undo the fabric of the universe itself. They want that power, Araria continued, her voice breaking slightly. And I am the key to unlocking it. Before James could respond, a loud crash echoed from the vault door, followed by the sounds of the operatives trying to break through. They were relentless. They would not stop until they had what they wanted. Get ready, Lindora said, her voice tight with focus. We're about to have company. Araria's eyes glowed brighter as the symbols around them began to shift. I can stop them. I can stop all of them. But I need your help. James looked at her, his heart swelling with pride and fear. He had no idea what she was capable of, but he knew one thing. She was his daughter, and he would fight to protect her, no matter the cost. Let's do it, he said, his voice steady. Araria raised her hands, and the vault itself seemed to respond, the very walls humming with power. The operatives outside the door screamed in fury as they tried to breach the barrier, but the vault's energy field was too strong. The room shook as Araria channeled the ancient energy within the vault, her form glowing with the power of her ancestors. A wave of energy surged outward, enveloping the entire station, and in that instant, the cloaked operatives were thrown back, their technology overwhelmed by the force of the vault's power. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the lights flickered one last time, and the hum of the energy began to subside. The station stabilized. Araria collapsed to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. James rushed to her side, his hand on her shoulder. You did it, he said softly, his voice filled with awe. I had to, she whispered, her voice trembling. The power, it's in me. It's all in me. The truth of Araria's bloodline had changed everything. She wasn't just a princess, a daughter, or an heir. She was the last hope of an entire civilization, the key to saving not just Nexus Prime, but perhaps the universe itself. But as they stood in the heart of the vault, the knowledge of the power she wielded weighing heavily on her, one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to change forever, and they would be at the center of it.